Why did the Soviet Union, against all odds, manage to turn the tide of World War II? How did they endure unimaginable losses, brutal winters, and one of the most devastating invasions in history? Today we're diving deep into the history books to uncover the secrets behind Russian resilience in World War II. From legendary battles to sheer human endurance, we'll explore the key factors that helped the Soviets withstand and ultimately defeat Nazi Germany. Stick around till the end, because some of these factors may surprise you. Let's start with the obvious. The odds were completely stacked against the Soviet Union at the start of the war, when Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa in June 1941. The Soviet Union was caught off guard. The German war machine, considered one of the most formidable military forces in history, launched a blitzkrieg, lightning war, that saw over 3 million Axis troops invade Soviet territory, pushing deep into the heart of Russia in a matter of weeks. In the early months, Soviet losses were staggering. Millions of soldiers captured or killed. Major cities like Kyiv and Smolensk fell rapidly. Moscow itself was under direct threat by the end of 1941. But if history has shown us anything, it's that underestimating Russian resilience is a mistake, one that both Napoleon and Hitler learned the hard way. One of the biggest challenges for Germany wasn't just the Red Arm, it was Russia itself. Russia's vast landscape is both a liability and an advantage. Yes, it made mobilization difficult, but it also served as a natural defensive weapon. The further the Germans advanced, the more their supply lines stretched thin, making it increasingly difficult to transport food, fuel, and reinforcements. Then came the Russian winter. Just like Napoleon's army in 1812, the Germans were completely unprepared for the brutal Soviet winter. Temperatures plummeted to 40 degrees Fahrenheit and 40 degrees, freezing tanks, weapons, and soldiers alike. Meanwhile, the Soviet forces were accustomed to these conditions. Equipped with winter gear and trained in survival tactics, Hitler had expected a quick victory. But by the time the harsh winter set in, the Germans found themselves stuck in a frozen nightmare with no way forward and no way back. Another major reason for Soviet resilience was the sheer endurance and determination of the Russian people. During the Siege of Leningrad 1941 to 1944, which lasted an unimaginable 872 days, civilians endured extreme starvation, bombings, and freezing temperatures. The population resorted to eating anything they could find. Leather belts, wallpaper paste, even sawdust, just to survive. And yet they never surrendered. Despite suffering over 1 million deaths, the people of Leningrad held their city, demonstrating an unbreakable will to resist. This was a defining characteristic of the Soviet war effort. Suffering was seen as a duty, a sacrifice for the motherland. This resilience wasn't just in Leningrad, it was everywhere. In Stalingrad, Moscow, and even the smallest villages, people fought with whatever they had, whether it was rifles, Molotov cocktails, or even just their bare hands. As the Germans advanced deeper into Soviet territory, the Red Army employed one of the most ruthless and effective defensive tactics in history, the scorched earth strategy. This meant that as Soviet forces retreated, they destroyed everything in their path. Burning crops, blowing up bridges and railways, evacuating factories deep into the Ural Mountains. The goal: deny the Germans any resources that could help their war effort. The strategy worked. The German army, already struggling with logistics, found itself without food, fuel, or shelter in the freezing Russian winter. It was a slow, painful death by starvation, exposure, and exhaustion. There's no denying that Stalin's leadership was brutal. The Great Purge of the 1930s had already weakened the Soviet military by removing thousands of experienced officers, making it vulnerable in the early stages of the war. However, Stalin eventually learned from his mistakes. He delegated military command to capable generals like Zhukov, who was instrumental in defending Moscow and leading the counteroffensive at Stalingrad. Stalin also masterfully used propaganda to rally the nation, portraying the war as a patriotic struggle for survival. Slogans like "Not one step back" and "For the motherland" became rallying cries that pushed soldiers to fight with unmatched ferocity. If there's one battle that defined Russian resilience, It was the Battle of Stalingrad, August 1942, February 1943. Stalingrad was more than just a city, it was a symbol. Hitler was obsessed with taking it, and Stalin was equally determined to defend it at all costs. The battle was a meat grinder, with street-to-street, house-to-house combat. Soviet snipers, most famously Vasily Zaitsev, picked off German soldiers one by one. Civilians fought alongside soldiers, turning the city into an unbreakable fortress. Then came Operation Uranus, the Soviet counteroffensive that encircled over 300,000 German troops. Cut off from supplies and starving, the German Sixth Army surrendered in February 1943, a devastating blow to Nazi Germany. From that moment on, the tide of the war turned. The Red Army was no longer just defending, they were on the offensive. Following Stalingrad, the Red Army launched a series of massive offensives. The Battle of Kursk, July 1943, saw the largest tank battle in history. Operation Bagration, June 1944, shattered the German front line, liberating vast territories. By April 1945, the Red Army had stormed into Berlin. On May 9, 1945, Germany officially surrendered to the Soviet Union, marking the end of the war in Europe. The cost? Over 27 million Soviet lives lost, a number greater than any other nation in the war. But the Soviet Union had prevailed. So why were the Russians so resilient during World War II? Geography and climate worked in their favor. The Soviet people endured unimaginable suffering, yet refused to give up. The scorched earth strategy left the enemy stranded and weakened. Patriotic fervor and propaganda fueled an unbreakable fighting spirit. Key military victories like Stalingrad turned the tide of the war. In the end, the war on the Eastern Front was not just a battle of weapons, but a battle of willpower. The Soviet Union's resilience was built on sacrifice, survival, and the determination to protect their homeland at all costs. And that is why they emerged victorious. What do you think was the most important factor in Soviet resilience? Let me know in the comments. And if you're fascinated by World War II history, don't forget to check out my deep dive into the D-Day landings. Hit that like button, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. This is History Replay, This Day.